Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast with Dave Roberts. A unique skill all humans have is the ability to share information across generations. And the Teaching Journeys podcast does just that. It creates learning opportunities with each amazing guest with a goal that each episode makes a positive impact on people worldwide. Before we hear from today's guest, please share this podcast with your family, friends, and colleagues, and don't forget to leave a rating, review, or both.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I am your host, Dave Roberts. Today, it is my pleasure to have as my guest, Marty McNabb. Marty is the founder of Show and Tales. Marty is a legacy artist who creates heirloom visual narratives from her clients' photo, document, and memorabilia collections. In other words, she tells stories with other people's stuff. She's also an interactive story-sharing facilitator who helps people build deeper connections, community, and legacy by curating highly interactive public exhibitions and hosting gatherings about the things that matter, which, by the way, is the name of her podcast, and which I had the pleasure of being her first guest on probably well over a year ago.
Yeah.
So with that, Marty, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm glad I'm able to reciprocate and have you on my podcast now.
Oh, yes. And thank you for starting us starting this whole thing. Honestly, I'd been asked to, like probably you have too, to do a podcast for a while. And so I ended up being encouraged probably for 4 years to do a podcast. But, life, it gets busy, complicated. But you reached out to me when I was hosting a Things That Matter, or AKA a Show and Tales, for the Global Grief Conference. And you had said, darn it, you were offering a workshop at the same exact time I was. And I said, well, I would love to have you be my first guest. I'd never done it, but you motivated me to do it. And what a wonderful way to kick off my podcast. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And that was a memorable discussion we had anyway, Marty.
Yes.
In terms of basically the object that I had used to create a continued bond with my daughter's memory, her essence, and that was quite a memorable experience for me to share, and I was glad that we were able to do that together.
Oh, me too. It was perfect because, as we've spoken about before, often people think that the object has to be an heirloom, or it has to be something so precious or so, fancy or whatever. And you started me off the best way. My podcast, you started off so well by bringing the air freshener fan for your vehicle and telling me the story of your beautiful daughter. So I'm grateful.
Well, for our viewers, there's the air fan, probably less than $2. And this brings me back to a precious memory that I had with my daughter, Janine, that it was like it was occurring in real time. That's how vivid it was. A small object like a car fan just contained so many memories and so many connections. And I think that's for anybody. I mean, it could be the smallest, it could be the biggest of objects. It's the memories that are attached to that connect us to our loved ones.
I always say that it's not that things matter, it's that the stories that get attached to them that do. And that was a big one. And you also showed a lip balm thing that was empty, that was Mary Kay, that was about your mom and her story about that. So, and I learned so much from you. I knew nothing about linking objects until, that day when you shared that information.
And that's what you'd been doing anyway. I mean, you'd be taking individual stuff, as you so described it in your bio, and just having individuals talk about the memories that were connected to that stuff. Dennis Glass called them linking objects, which is a more formal term for those objects that allow us to create a meaningful bond with our transitioned loved ones. But it's linking objects, stuff, it's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same.
Yep. Absolutely. That's what I've found.
Yeah. And that's what I have found too. It's the power that's attached to those objects, not how we describe them. So,
Yes. Yes.
so folks,
This is great.
well, I have questions for you. If you're ready for them.
Sure.
Okay.
Why not?
All right. Here we go. So, Marty, first of all, please tell our listeners about the experiences that have influenced your current life path or life choices.
Yeah. So, well, I'm going to focus on one particular thing as opposed to the big question. Just I've had people ask, how did I come up with show and tales as the story sharing gatherings that I started over a decade ago? So I've hosted over 200 of them. I'd say the first 6 years were in person, mostly in New York City, but then I did pop-ups in other places. And then, of course, like all of us during the pandemic, when I met you, Dave, um, everything went online. So I did them through Zoom. And so people ask why I started. Well, the first reason was more than likely your guests have never heard of a legacy artist. So more than likely, they've never heard of somebody who goes through people's photo, document, and memorabilia archives and creates a visual narrative from it. That I'm basically somebody's private curator or the curator of their quote unquote museum. But of course, you can't have everything in that museum. That would be overwhelming. So I do a lot of the curating and picking and choosing. I don't necessarily hear the story from my client, but I sense it from the objects themselves. And then I curate it, and then my clients use it as a way to remember things and reconnect and build those deeper connections. But but there weren't a lot of us back in the day, so to speak, over maybe 25 years ago. And so I needed a way to market my work and get the word out. And of course, I knew it was word of mouth. It was developed. You had to have a sense of connection and intimacy because these are such precious memories and souvenirs of our life story. And so often they're stuck in a box or in a suitcase or a storage unit or an attic or a basement. And then there's a lot of shame about that as well, that they've not done anything with this. So I knew it was word of mouth and I had to establish an intimacy and a connection. And so what better way than inviting them to an event to bring their objects and their photos and tell their stories as a way to connect with me. So first it was a marketing reason for me to come up with a creative way to market that feels good and does good at the same time. And secondly, what I realized, Dave, is I am not a confident or comfortable storyteller in the written word. I can easily share my story on audio, video in a setting like this, but I'm not someone who, if you end up posing to me, what's your best childhood memory? Or what's your this, like those story prompts? And what I realized, I'm not like that because my parents weren't. So I didn't come from a family of natural storytellers, either verbally or in writing. So I ended up realizing that that's why I started this show and tell for adults, so to speak, or realistically, my goal is that it's intergenerational, that we build. I'm right now at a Thompson Senior Center, bringing it to seniors, but hoping to also have children and grandchildren involved as well. But those are the reasons when you say, how am I here? Like a lot of people ask that because I imagine like a lot of your listeners, we've taken different paths. There's been many detours in our lives. And I was a high school biology teacher in New York City public school. I had a background in plant and soil science. I was thinking about being a farmer. It's like I've done, and people are like, how did you get from science to memories? But I have a feeling that you have that same experience with your background as well, Dave. So they are connected.
Yeah, I think anything that's science, not science related, based in spiritual practices or all holistic practices can all be integrated given the right set of circumstances. And the other thing, you're right, you're the first legacy artist I've had on the Teaching Journeys podcast. You're very rare in terms of what you do and how you do it. But the other thing that I like about what you do is it accounts for the fact that not everybody are auditory learners. Not everybody are learn through the written word. There are individuals that are more visual and visual learners. The artist students that I work with at Pratt Munson School of Art in Utica, New York, they're visual learners. So that's how they respond. That's how they can conceptualize their stories. That's how they can conceptualize understanding of concepts. So we have to cater to that. And we have to realize that individuals will grieve through a variety of different mechanisms. And what you do is a very creative way to grieve. It falls right in there with poetry, with art, with music. It all fits.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've spoken over the last year and a half that we've known each other, 2 years, I didn't purposely connect with the death care or end of life or last responder community or grief community. I didn't do it on purpose. I just started hosting these events and invited people to bring objects and tell stories. And so it naturally led to people bringing in objects from people who had died. And as a way that they could tell that story and relive and remember that memory and do it in front of other people who didn't more than likely know this person, but that sharing was so cathartic, so therapeutic to be able to talk about those people with strangers actually ended up providing that space. And so I'm just so grateful for the fact that I started hosting these events. And it's directly led me into the death care, the end of life, the grief community, and ultimately connected me with you. So, yeah.
Yeah, the people that have come into my life, it's no coincidence. These are individuals that I was destined to meet along the path. And, everybody I've met has given me what I've needed at that particular moment, have given me a voice for my grief. And for you and everybody else who has been in my life and has given me that voice, I appreciate that tremendously. So, and I have gratitude every day for, what the challenges of dealing with my daughter's transition has brought me. So,
Yes.
but anyway, on your website, I found this mission statement about show and tell. So I want to read this to you, and I have a question attached to it.
Sure.
To create a warm and welcoming environment for people to share the stories of their photos and things. Sharing out loud with others, bearing witness keeps memories alive, passes along a piece of personal history, impacts someone else's life, and enables participants to reconnect to their own forgotten stories and history. So the question I have for you is that how do photos and other things that individuals share effectively shape our life narrative and give substance to our personal histories?
Wow. Well, that's quite a deep question. And as I mentioned, Dave, so much of creation of Show and Tales was happenstance. It wasn't on purpose. So I didn't know what I was building. One of the things I've learned in my work in activism and in just my own life journey is that it's important not to say that you're creating a safe space, because that's not in my ability to do. All I can, and that's why I said I create a warm and welcoming space. So that's the responsibility that I take in holding this space. But in terms of how it shapes the narrative, how you can, what I've noticed, like I said, I've hosted over 200 of them. And what I've noticed is, however, oftentimes there's been more of a traumatic, as a matter of fact, in this space last week, someone ended up bringing in a pair of shoes, children's shoes. And we asked her for the story. And of course, there were kind of more light type of stories that have been shared before. And she's like, I don't mean to bring anybody down, like, I don't mean to change this. But she proceeded to tell us the story of that. Those were her daughter's shoes when she was 3 years old, and she drowned. And what I found in those difficult situations, the harder stories to tell, is that in each one, by being able to kind of have some distance from it, like see it from the outside a bit, and it actually is physically. That's another thing I've seen, Dave, is that people holding on to something, that it's actually a physical prop. I never thought of props as holding you up, but I've seen it over and over again at my events, where people holding the objects themselves, or holding the photo and looking at it. I do offer people to share stuff that's digital, that's on their phone and things like that. I do offer that, but there's something, I can't describe it, but it's something like, there's something magical there. It's like the story gets weaved in or pounded in, or because it's been touched by, it's been worn by this person. And I can't say in every point, but I've gotten testimonials from people who have said just the sharing of the story in front of strangers. They wouldn't have told it to people that weren't strangers. That just the telling of it in front of people was that helped them create some peace, find peace, even if it was just momentary. So I don't know if that answered the question about, but I don't know what the magic is per se. And I love what you say. Some people are not like, they're not written. They can't share their stories in writing, but it pours out of them, like literally pours out of them the minute they're holding on to something, and it's propping them up.
Yeah, I know for me, my daughter left behind a collection of Tiggers, and I have this big floppy Tigger in my room. And whenever I want to really feel close to Janae, I'll go and hug Tigger, because there was a lot of Tigger in my daughter. And whenever I'm hugging Tigger, I'm hugging my daughter. And a lot of times I just need that hug from Tigger, because spiritually, symbolically, however you choose to conceptualize it, I see that as being a hug from my daughter from beyond. And so for me, having the ability to grasp a physical object that was intimately associated with her legacy, with her personality, also keeps me closer.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so funny that you say that, Dave, because one of the participants in this series that I'm doing here at the Thompson Senior Center, he brought his Barry and a 50-year-old teddy bear, but in talking about it, he, of course, it, his story of his time with his parents and his family and all of that came back. But because this teddy bear has been with him, has traveled this road, this life path with him all these years. So yeah, so something about that.
So without giving away any personal information or personal identity, what has been the most memorable photo or object that has been shared with you? And why do you see that as being the most memorable?
Well, that's always sort of like, what's your, who's your favorite child?
Yeah, when I get that question asked of me, I say all of you. I don't play favorites.
Exactly. So realistically, it is a very difficult question to answer, but the one that comes to mind the most is, so because I started show and tales in New York City, a couple of things became clear to me. One is that show and tell from elementary school is not offered. It's not a thing that a lot of other countries, schools in other countries offer. So it is not a universal experience. So I knew it wasn't maybe, but I didn't know that it wasn't in a lot of places. Um, the other thing I learned is that a lot of people, when they moved to New York City, they could not move with their things for some reason or another. So their things were actually back in their country. So what I've said is, yes, a digital, you can offer something digitally, you can to show. It can be a representative object is another thing. So this one woman who I never saw before then or after this one event, came to Branded Saloon in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn, where Show and Tales was born. I say it's the birthplace of Show and Tales. My friend owns it, and I in the back room. And I went just a week ago and hosted a couple of events there too. But she came. She was the one who I was thinking about holding a prop. You could tell getting up in front of people. I mean, that's why we did show and tell from elementary school, is to get people used to public speaking, to get children used to public speaking, right? So it's like it's Toastmasters for elementary stage is the show and tell. But I don't think she'd experienced it when she was growing up. And but she had an egg carton with her, empty. And she proceeded to talk about her experience in Russia. Her mom was a single mom, had to work 2 jobs. So on the weekends, her mom would drop her off at her parents' house. So her grandfather and grandmother. And every weekend, her grandfather would make her an egg, would cook her an egg every weekend. That was she said he didn't really speak a lot. They didn't talk a lot, but he would make this egg for her. And a couple of things is both families were pretty poor, and eggs were rare and expensive and precious. But so was the granddaughter. She was precious as well. So this egg carton told that story, an empty egg carton, and something that a lot of us take for granted, being able to have eggs whenever we want, But that egg Carton told that story of a grandfather's love. So that stood out.
Thank you for sharing that. That would be memorable in my book as well too, just because of the background. Um, the fact that this was not just inherent to the United States. We're talking about, another country as well too. So that would tell me that linking objects or stuff, it cuts across the cultural divide and gives us one point where we can universally meet in agreement.
Absolutely.
So, from your experience, what have you observed the impact that either show and tales has had on helping an individual work through their grief, um, through the basic objects that they share, or just in general, what do you see as being the impact of on an individual's grief through objects they share in general? And do you believe it helps individuals transform the relationships with their loved ones?
So again, big questions, Dave.
If I
Deep questions.
that's why they pay me the big bucks.
You and me both.
That's right.
um, so I don't think that I'm able to comment on, does it transform their relationship with their loved one? That's a little beyond, quote unquote, my pay grade. Um, and I also haven't gotten a specific testimonial with that, from somebody that has said that. What I have witnessed, as I mentioned before, was I have had people reach out to me and leave a voice message, just saying, I wanted to reach out and thank you for helping me not feel so alone during the pandemic. That, uh, and she was somebody who just came to one event, didn't come back to another one, but it was enough to make her feel less alone.
Mhm.
So I know that. I know I've had people who've said, like I mentioned before, that it, um, just having people. So the biggest thing that I say in my work is that both my story sharers and my story listeners are being vulnerable and generous. It's everyone in the room, not just the story sharer. And that's why I do call it story sharing and not storytelling, because storytelling is more performative and there's the building of the fourth wall. And for me, with my events, the whole point is to bring down those walls and to make deeper connections. So, so I would say that in terms of, I do think that it does transform their, it helps them with their grief, mainly because holding on to the story and not sharing it, not having, because what I experienced, and I know many people who are listening to your show probably have experienced, is that at a certain point after death or a loss, you your closest circle starts, you know, which is it was called pandemic exhaustion or something. Like you just, they don't know what more to say. They've heard the stories before. They get exhausted from it. And I can get it from both sides, but but being able to provide a place where people can share this story to strangers in a new way, in a different way. And interestingly enough, I was telling another friend who does another program, that's around humor. And it's like, it's funny now, like it wasn't funny then, but it's funny now. Um, was that same experience of having, sharing the story, giving them that perspective on their life, that they're a perspective, a little distance from it, that they often, when they start, but when they often finish the story, it has, there's a lightness to it. There's a, there's even a little humor to it. There's a little light, it lightens up as they continue, as we hold space for them to share more of the story. Um, and that's, I have seen that several times, not all the time,
Mhm.
but I've seen that more often than not, is that there's like a lightness as the story comes out of them.
Well, one of the things that I think you do well, and this is just, I think from what I saw with our interview, is that I think to hold space for somebody's story, we have to establish ourselves as active listeners. We have to be present for that story, let the story unfold the way it's going to unfold, and then just share our observations or validate, what you've heard and validate the uniqueness and the special qualities that their deceased loved one had. And I think that in and of itself is going to draw more people in. They're going to come back. They're going to want to share more because if I had a nickel for every individual I've ever sat with who has been going through grief to say, I just wanted to tell my story to somebody, but there was nobody who wanted to listen. It seemed like I was imposing upon them. I would probably be a very rich man right now. That all we really need to do, I think, for your listeners and for our listeners, just bear witness, hold space, just be present for that individual's story, let it unfold, let them share whatever objects they want to share that allow them to connect to their memory and move through their grief. And actually, we begin, I think, to move through our grief by remembering our loved ones and holding them close to our hearts, as opposed to for putting our grief in a little box, burying it after a predetermined amount of time and moving on with our lives. Because there's no moving on, there's moving through.
True.
There's no closure. Just because the physical body has died doesn't mean the relationship dies as well. That relationship is ongoing. So,
Absolutely. Without a doubt. Yes. Totally agree.
do you see any situation where storytelling isn't transformative, isn't a transformative experience for some people? Um, and if so, what do you think may contribute to that?
Well, needless to say, my events are open to the public, generally speaking. I mean, I do get hired by individual organizations, and those aren't, but most of my events have been open to the public. And they are, generally speaking, if they feel so inspired to share, it usually does end up like, I'm not saying again that they transform, like they go through their entire grief or they make a huge shift in it necessarily, but just a little bit of um, a little bit more ease or peace or less anxiety about sharing. Like there's just a breath, they take a breath in it. So I feel like people who come to my events, they're volunteering. And so if some of them will not share, they come and listen. Um, and a few people, though, as I'm wrapping up when I'm in person and online too, but I'll see that they're like touching their bag or they're touching something in their pocket or something. And when we're kind of wrapping up, and I'm like, is there anyone else that would like to share? Ev- Eventually, they end up pulling that thing out of their pocket or out of their bag or something. Like most of them, there's plenty that don't, and I think that's fine too. Like I said, I value the listeners. We get so few opportunities, and that's what I learned in looking out at the world and what was offered during the pandemic, there was lots of education. So there was somebody that was, giving you information, resources. There was a lot of that was offered. But I'm a believer that we don't need more information. We need more connections.
I agree. And, one of the things as you were talking about inviting individuals who are willing to share their stories with you, the thing that kind of crossed my mind is that when stories aren't transformative is because stories are never told. And there are so many stories that go untold for whatever reason. A person may not feel that their story is valid enough, is significant enough, or they may not think their story may help somebody. But, the bottom line is that we can never judge the value of anybody's life, the value of anybody's story. So I tell individuals, tell your story, because it's gonna help somebody you may not even have imagined it's gonna help. It's gonna help somebody, but don't let your stories go silent within. And I'm glad that you provide that that space for individuals to share. That's a valuable service, and I'm a firm advocate for what you do, and I tell everybody about Marty's in your area. Go check out one of her events. You'll definitely leave inspired. So we are getting close to wrapping up. So I'm going to ask you this one last question, just in terms of how people can contact you about your services. Where can they find you, and what events or projects do you have going on currently? And talk about what you got going on for 2024.
Yes.
So go for it. This is your opportunity to promote with the valuable services that you do and how people can find you.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate this opportunity. So, you can find me at Show and Tales. So that's TALES, not like a dog tail or a ponytail or so showandtales.com. And you can follow me on Instagram at Show and Tales. And that has to be spelled out, even though my brand is with an ampersand. Where you can follow me has to be on without the ampersand. So Show and Tales. And then in terms of projects, so most of the work that I'm doing now, most of my focus now, as I mentioned, I'm at a senior living community right now, a senior living center in Vermont. My big push for 2024 is going to be to get my series, my Things That Matter series. It's a 6-week program or an 8-week program. The 8-week program has a exhibition as part of it. And the whole idea is that we have people thinking about their life based on 30 things. So, those 30 those 30-day challenges. So I invite people to look around their home, their office, their bodies, like bags and your earrings and your glasses, everything can have your sweatshirt there. Dave has a story. My t-shirt has a story. So look around your space and figure out what 30 things would do the best job in sharing your story. So that anybody can do. They can come to my website. They can get that information, this little playlist or things. But for senior living communities, I'm inviting them to do that. And then I'm inviting them to pick a few items that get up in an exhibition, with the idea that we don't put names attached to the objects at that point. We invite the community to interact with the exhibit for a while and ask questions and be curious about whose wooden spoon is that? Whose wolf sweatshirt is that? Who's whatever? Like, what is this? And who are these people? Again, to continue to encourage connections, deeper connections, community, and talk about legacy, because that's another part of my work is what do you do with these things, or what do you want to do with these things that mean so much? first thing is definitely tell your family about the stories of them. They won't know why you keep that little turtle up on your windowsill. So unless you tell them, why is it so important to you? So they may keep it because of the story, right? But if it's just the turtle on the windowsill and there's no story attached, they're not gonna know why it's so important. So please tell your stories to your listeners. Tell your stories, and then what happens when you die? Like, will your children or grandchildren or historical societies, museums, some of them would want things too, because what are museums and historical societies but great big show and tales after all? So that's what I'm up to, and traveling between New Mexico and Vermont and everywhere in between. So I'd love to have you catch me along my route and bring me to your city or area. And I hope to get up to you, Dave, at some point. Maybe we can talk about doing an event together up there.
That would be fun.
Yeah,
That would be fun. So yeah, let's have that conversation after we get past the holidays and everything. So, but with that, Marty, it was just so great having you on the podcast today, and just thanks for taking some time out of what I know is a busy schedule to spend some time with me and our listeners. I know they will benefit greatly from your wisdom and your experiences. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate this opportunity.
And you're welcome. And with that, that is a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I am your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and please remember to share this podcast with your family, friends, and colleagues. And don't forget to leave a rating, review, or both.